Well, good morning all to all members of County Council and to all of our staff. I would like to welcome everyone this morning, those that are in person and joining us virtually this morning. And to all members of the public that are in attendance and the media also. We are going to open our meeting today as an audit committee meeting, and I would like to call this meeting to order. We do have an agenda that has been circulated in advance, and I would entertain a mover and a seconder for the acceptance of the agenda, and that would be Councillors Bazinet and Past Warden Guillen. All in favor of this motion? That is carried. I thank you. Do we have any declaration of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof of the agenda item? Leah, I see Councillor Noel, please.
My apologies, a technical difficulty, Mr. Warden.
No worries. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Noel. So the purpose of the audit committee is to receive the report, and I would like to welcome Matthew Goderich and Donald Harrison, who will be presenting virtually to us this morning. So welcome, and please proceed with the planning report.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I will share my screen to walk us through the materials, but recognizing that the materials were shared in advance with committee, so we will work through these fairly crisply. As usual, if we have any questions, we'd be happy to take those as we go along, but there will be some time at the end for questions. So as we move through, as introduced, my name is Matthew Goderich, and I'm the lead audit partner for the audit of the financial statements of the County of Huron. And with me is Donald Harrison, the manager on the account. I've been involved with the file now, probably close to 10 years, and Donald's been working with myself on it for several years. So as we move down through the agenda, I'll touch first on materiality, and this is something that we do discuss each and every year. It is required that we have this discussion with committees so that they're familiar with the scope and extent of the work that we're performing. We use materiality for two purposes. One, to set the level of scoping and testing that we perform, and secondly, to evaluate any uncorrected amounts that might be in the financial statements. So as we move down, we set materiality this year at approximately 1.8 million, which is up slightly from last year at 1.6 million. How we do this is we establish that as a percentage of a benchmark. And for your type of organization, the benchmark we use is total revenue. Now, we do adjust that total revenue for social service transfers. These are some of the transfers that you receive from the province and then are transferred out to recipients under those programs. And so it makes sense that that's a proper way to sort of measure the activities of the county. We see that number continues to grow, and that is the rationale for the increase in the materiality this year compared to last. We are at about 2% of total revenues, despite the sort of the bars on sort of the bottom left that make it seem like it's been a big jump. It's actually quite small, but we're still around 2%. And this is consistent with our audits of upper tier municipalities in the province of Ontario. Furthermore, I will mention we have set materiality for the two other audits that we do, being the library board, trust funds, and those are at 80,000 and 6,700 respectively, and those are not changed from the prior. Moving into the next slide, we do recognize that included in your financial statements are liabilities for employee future benefits, as well as there will be liabilities this year for asset retirement obligations. And we do note that management will use several of its internal and external resources to help them determine those balances, and we'll be working with those specialists as we go. There are two significant new accounting standards that will appear in the financial statements this year. The first being, as I said, asset retirement obligations, which requires the county to record a liability in its financial statements for any obligations or requirements that they have to retire or take out of service or decommission certain of its assets. The most common that we're seeing in the municipal sector is the remediation of potential asbestos in county-owned buildings. And we do understand that management has, commenced a significant project to identify and quantify those costs. So we expect to see those as new items in the financial statements this year. The second major change is the accounting for financial instruments. And that's just a fancy word for cash, investments, payables, and debt. Now, for the most part, nothing will change, but the county may hold certain types of investments that may have to be recorded on a fair value basis rather than an original cost basis. And we'll work through management to make sure those are appropriately identified and recorded. On the next slide, we provide sort of an overview of our general captions to the financial statements and our risk assessments. I'll talk about the first being the risk assessment related to the management override of controls. And we have talked about this before, and this is a presumed fraud risk for all financial statement audits in Canada. And basically the presumption is that regardless of how good any internal control structure is, management, and specifically finance management, is in a unique position to potentially override those controls if they were to want to book things or record things inappropriately in the financial statements. And so we're required to identify that as a risk of fraud. That's not something unique to accounting. And we're also required to identify that as a significant risk. And that just means we have certain responses to that. We'll talk about some of these others as we go through. And so for the override of internal controls, I said, we have a special response. We do look at significant or high risk journal entries that have been reported in the accounts. We look at what estimates are reported, and we say we take a retrospective look at those, meaning we have a look back and see how those estimates were established in previous periods and how they developed to fruition. As well, to the extent there are any significant unusual transactions, we want to make sure that those make sense in the context of accounting. Now, let me reiterate that this is presumed, and we have to go through these considerations for all audits. This is not unique to accounting. Donald?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So in addition to the significant risk we identified over management override control, there are other areas we identified where we'll be focusing. And one of them will be asset retirement obligation, as we just discussed. And for this, we will be obtaining the management assessment and also the report from the management expert. They would have been used to calculate the data, so also the methodologies that are required to assess asset retirement obligation. We will also ensure that the proper disclosures made in the financial statements. With regard to the financial instruments, we will obtain management assessment of financial instruments and how they identify the instruments, and also we will ensure there's a proper disclosures and the presentations are made in the financial statements. Moving on to other areas of risk of material misstatements, grant revenue is the significant revenue for the county. We will obtain confirmation for the grant revenue, including also testing the deferred revenue, which is deferred for the future periods where the timing of the revenue will be different. Also, moving on to the expenditure sides, including the payroll, we will be testing the expenditures and the payroll using our substantive analytical procedures by comparing prior results and including any changes happened that during the year. Moving on to the asset sides, significant assets class for the county is the capital assets. So we'll be testing the additions, the disposals, and also we will be recalculating the depreciation to ensure that the proper amortization made during the year. And in concurrence with the expenditures, we will be testing the repairs and maintenance to ensure that the completion of the tangible assets are accounted properly. One of the other significant revenues is taxation. So we'll be obtaining confirmation for the lower tier municipalities, and we'll ensure that the reconciliations are made by the counties to ensure they record their income for the year, and also if there's any payable receivables are accounted properly at the year end. And another significant revenue is the user charge revenue. Our planned response for this type of revenues will be substantive analytical procedure where we will be recalculating the revenue accounted during the year, comparing the prior year, including the changes any happened during the year. Next slide, we have outlined our timeline. We did our planning and risk assessment during the month of November and December last year, and we have planned to do our final testing late March and mid-April. In that period, we will be planning to issue the report for the library and the trust fund. And in July, when the statements are available for the health unit, we will start our consolidation procedures and we'll be issuing the consolidated financial statements with our final audit report.
Hey, thanks, Donald. On this page, we just reiterate the fee structure as per the most recent request for proposal. We do note that this year, upon adoption of the new accounting standards, there will be some additional time and effort, and we'll work with management to assess and quantify that those change orders on a reasonable basis and based on the rates that we've agreed to in our RFP. And I think that is all we needed to go through. There were some appendices attached, including a copy of our engagement letter and other information. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to the chair. I'll stop sharing the presentation and we'll be available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Matthew and Donald, for your presentation to council this morning. And now I will open it up if there are any questions or comments from any members of council. Are we all good? Thank you very much for this overview. And again, thank you very much, Matthew and Donald, for joining us this morning on this. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would entertain a mover and a seconder to receive the report from Matthew and Donald as presented. And that is P. Heffer and Councillor Vanstone. All in favor of the motion. And that is carried, and I thank you very much for that. And now I would entertain a mover and a seconder to adjourn the audit committee, and that would be Dietrich and Heffer. He almost missed it. All in favor of the motion. And that is carried. Thank you very much, and again, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Yep. Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to call our Council Day 2 meeting of Huron County Council to order and welcome all members of Huron County Council, our staff, that it will provide us facts and information so we can make the best decisions on behalf of the Corporation of the County of Huron and our residents. To all members of the public that are joining us this morning and also the media. I would like to indicate that council meetings are available live through Zoom and recordings may be posted online on Huron County YouTube channel. You may be seen and or heard as part of these broadcasts, and your name, comments and or presentation materials will become part of the public record. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the approval of the agenda that has been circulated in advance? And that would be Councillors Harding and Alvin McClellan. All in favor of this motion? And that is carried. Thank you. Do any members of council have a declaration of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof of any agenda item that we have today? Seeing none. We do have 3 sets of minutes, those being of the 2nd of February, that being Council Day 1, our special budget meeting on the 14th of February, and simplifying accessibility on the 15th. And I would entertain a mover and a seconder to approve all 3 sets of minutes. Councillors Finch and Bazinet, are there any questions on any of these minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Under delegations, petitions, and presentations, it is an absolute privilege to present an award that was presented at the EDCO meeting in Toronto approximately 2 weeks ago. CAO Work and myself were very privileged to receive this award on behalf of one of our staff. So I would like to call now on our Director of Economic Development, Vicki Loss, to make some comments. Please, Vicki.
Thank you, Warren, and through you to Council. It is a great pleasure for me today to talk to you about the Bright Ideas competition, which is offered through the Economic Developers Council of Ontario. The Bright Ideas competition is an opportunity to expand your networks by working with other economic developers across the province and to dig deep into current issues of the day. It also awards the competitors 5 additional credits towards their professional designation. So for those of you in agriculture, it's much like the CEUs for CAAs or Certified Crop Advisors, continuing education credits. So those are some of the benefits of participating. When you're in economic development, your networks are one of your most valuable resources. So it introduces when we participate, it introduces our staff to other economic developers across the province, and also the mentors who participate in the project. So teams of 2 dig into a topic, they research it for over 9 months. The call is out right now for next year's Bright Ideas. So they start now, pick a topic, form a team, and do a presentation at EDCO next January. Brittany Wise participated on behalf of Huron County, and I am thrilled to say that she and her partner, Brianna Carroll, placed first in the competition. So we're very proud of Brittany, the work she put into it. Her topic was on small business succession. So as we discovered in our BR&E, and as we're seeing in our workforce and our entrepreneurs are aging out. So what do we do to make sure that we don't lose those businesses along our value chain? And that's what Brittany and her partner looked at. What is the role of local government in supporting the transition of those small to medium-sized enterprises in our community? They built a robust toolkit. They did interviews across Canada to find their information, and that is part of why they were the winners of this year's Bright Ideas competition. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you very much for that, Vicki. And I am a firm believer, as is CAO work, that when we have staff that do outstanding work, it is absolutely the right thing to recognize them. And it is our privilege to recognize Brittany today. This award is from the Economic Developers Council of Ontario, and it is the 2023 Bright Ideas Competition Award of the Public Sector Best Practices for Encouraging Small Business Transitions, presented to Brittany Wise. Brittany, would you please come forward with Vicki and CAO work to have a photo, please? Congratulations. Congratulations, Brittany, on behalf of Huron County Council, and we're very, very proud of you. Thank you. With that, I would like to move on to 5.2, which is the population and housing projections. This is a tremendously informative presentation, and I would like to call on Sandra Weber to make some comments, our Director of Planning, at the outset, please. Sandra.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and good morning. Staff have been working with Watson and Associates economists on updated population and housing projections for the county and our 9 partner local municipalities. The project has been led by the Planning and Development Department through Denise and Victor, also with guidance and input from a working group with representatives from many of the local municipalities. And then we also got input on the draft information from the Huron County Economic Development Board and the Clerks and Treasurers Association. I would like to thank the local municipal staff as well for providing all of the building permit information. It was really important to have that data as the background for this study. So thanks to staff for being willing to pull that together for all of us. So this morning we have Adam Fisher here from Watson and Associates in person to present the final report. And also online we have Jamie Cook from Watson and Associates, and Denise and Victor are both here in the gallery. And so And Jamie is going to present the final report, and then they would all be happy to answer any questions that council may have. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Warden.
Thank you very much for that, Sandra. And it is a pleasure for me to welcome Adam to present to us today, along with Jamie virtually. Welcome.
Welcome. Good morning. Thank you for having us, and thank you for the opportunity to work on this study. It's been a real pleasure, and working with the team here, both at the county and, as Sandra mentioned, a lot with the ECDEV groups and local municipal staff, and all the insights that we've received through the process. It's been a really enjoyable study. So my name is Adam Fisher, and I'm a manager at Watson Associates. And as Sandra mentioned, I'm joined by Jamie Cook, who's a managing partner at the firm as well. And so to hop into the next slide, please. Perfect. Thank you. So to give a bit of an overview of what the study entailed, we first start off with a economic profile of the Huron County economy and demographics, as well as the surrounding economic region. And from that background research, we then form population growth scenarios, housing forecast by type, and then building into that further, a housing forecast by tenure, which is ownership and rental, as well as affordability to understand that housing picture as well. And lastly, then we do an allocation of the growth by area municipality and the primary settlement areas and remaining areas. Next slide, please. So this just gives a bit of a broad overview of our general approach to these growth forecast exercises. So we are doing a population and housing growth study through this exercise. And that really starts fundamentally with looking at the economics of the surrounding region, as well as the federal and provincial economy as well, and how those broader trends ultimately impact growth. So for example, looking at federal migration or immigration and how that then filters down across the province and so on and so forth. As well, we look at labor force, demographic trends, so looking at birth rates, the age of the county, employment growth outlook, and all of these various factors, which then feed into the demographic profile of the forecast, which looks at net migration, natural increase, age structure of Huron County specifically, the housing by structure type, by tenure, and then, as I mentioned, that allocation. And on the next slide, just looking at that a bit further, all those broad growth drivers and disruptors. So again, many of the things that we look at have touched on those economic opportunities, but also quality of life. That's a very important one. It's why many people are choosing to move to Huron County, particularly over the last decade. We've seen that substantial shift, and of course, quality of life is a big part of that factor. Aging population has substantial impacts on how the county will grow over the next 3 decades, and we'll dig into that a little bit further with future slides. Seasonal housing, of course, is another factor impacting growth, particularly during peak summer months, and how that growth impacts infrastructure and other requirements for the county as it grows. And technological change, of course, is another big factor. We know the mechanization of the agricultural sector, the automation of the manufacturing sector, all of these things are, supporting economic and GDP growth, but at the other end of the spectrum, they are reducing employment and the need for labor to support that economic growth that's been historically observed. So these all factors are broadly considered as part of this exercise. And on the next slide, we then, in the next section here, get into the local trends. So given the time, I'm not going to spend a significant amount of time on some of these slides, and they're just here for context more than anything. But so on this slide, we have a picture of the historical growth, employment growth over the last decade in the county by major sector. It's a bit small to see on the TV there, but you can see, for example, that construction was the largest growing sector in the county over the last decade from an employment perspective, where actually agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting has witnessed the biggest reduction in employment over the last decade. And again, that's in part due to mechanization. And this is employees only. So we do know there's a big component of work at home or self-employed farmers that wouldn't be picked up in this metric. And on the next slide, we have a summary of the county's historical growth over the last 2 decades. And really, as I'm sure jumps off the page here, is from 2001 to 2016, it was really a negative growth context for Huron County. As you can see, things started to turn around between 2011 and 2016, but it was relatively flat. And then there's been a substantial shift, a positive shift from 2016 to 2021, where there's been a significant amount of growth pressure, more so than has been observed over the last 2 decades. And what's important to emphasize about this is that it isn't necessarily a Huron County specific situation, as many of the surrounding municipalities have also been experiencing this wave of population and housing growth, which has in part been driven by COVID-19, but these trends of outward migration from the GTHA and the broader Golden Greater Horseshoe have been really emerging before COVID, but we like to think of it almost as the great accelerator of these trends that were starting to bubble at the surface really before the pandemic flipped things on its head, if you will. And then on the next slide, you can see that summary here that this shows the growth rates by census division between 16 and 2022 for many of the surrounding census divisions around Huron County. And again, getting to this idea that while Huron County did experience a substantial shift, so did many of the other surrounding areas such as Perth and Grey and all the other census divisions you can see here have really experienced that substantial increase in growth pressure. And on the next slide, and I do apologize, we're a very data heavy firm, and I know some of these slides can be a little data driven, but so the things we really like to examine as we're doing our work. And so on this slide, we have the historical building permit activity across the county. And I think what really jumps off the page here is things were relatively stable from 2012 to 2018. But after that, we really see a substantial shift in building activity. And this is getting back to that idea that this wasn't just a COVID phenomenon, that things really were starting to emerge before the pandemic. And there has been a very sustained level of building permit activity since 2019, which is really positive and good to see. And one of the things too, you know, we're working all across Ontario, and we're finding that 2023 number has been dramatically reduced for a lot of locations across the province. And I actually pulled in we received the full year 2023 data, which came in at 400 permits. So it actually exceeded the expectation on the page there. So suffice to say that Huron County has been quite successful in maintaining that sustained level of building activity compared to many other municipalities across Ontario. So it's a really encouraging sign to see for the county. And lastly, on the bubbles there in the mix, you can see that the housing also has been shifting a bit from the low density category, which would be your singles and semi-detached, towards high density development, which would be apartments. And on the next slide, I won't spend a lot of time on this one. This just summarizes the building permit activity since 2021. So just to get an idea of those post 2021 census growth trends, as you can see, Ashfield was the largest issuer of building permits since 2021, and then it's been relatively dispersed across the rest of the county. And, oh, the other way, please. There we go. Thank you. This slide then summarizes the active development applications across Huron County as of August 2023. And as you can see, there are three categories here: approved, draft approved, and under review. And really, we like to focus in on this approved and draft approved housing stock. So, and as you can see, there's almost 1,700 units within this category across the county, which again is a really encouraging sign to see. As the historical building permit activity tells us a picture of the past, this tells us that not only has this demand been observed historically, but that there is this pressure on the surface as well over the next 5 years to keep this sustained level of growth moving forward, as long as these units can be developed and absorbed by the building community. And beyond that, there's still a substantial amount of under review units in the pipeline as well. So all of this speaking to the fact that this changing growth pattern isn't just a historical view, but it's expected to continue on into the forecast as well, particularly in the short term with this supporting development application data. And on the next slide, we just summarize this with a bit more detail by area municipality. So on the left, we have the approved and draft approved units, which you can see are largely dispersed between Goderich and South Huron, representing a substantial share of those units, with the rest, again, being dispersed across the county. And we do, this does help inform the growth forecast over the next 5 or so years based on those trends in the approved and draft approved units. But the under review category also provides us some insight as well. And as we can see, it's a little less clear in the under review, as things can certainly change over the next couple of years as more applications come in. But we can see here that Goderich certainly has a strong demand moving forward based on the under review category as well. And the last slide for this section just looks at the seasonal housing. So as you can see on the left, we have the base as of 2023, which is largely within Blue Water at nearly half, with Ashfield, Central Huron, and South Huron accounting for a majority of the rest. But when we look at growth over the last 8 years, based on MPAC data, Blue Water really has been the driving force of that seasonal growth in the county. And in this section, we have the summary of our forecast work. So on the next slide, we can see here the Ministry of Finance projections for the Huron Census Division. So the Ministry of Finance does these annual projections for every census division in Ontario. And so what we have here, that very bottom line was from their work in 2017. And then moving up, we have 2019, 2021, and 2023. And as you can see, the ministry has certainly been changing its outlook for the county in that short time period from 2017. And those bubbles off to the right really summarize that, I think, where you can see the incremental expectation from 21 to 46. Back in 2019, the ministry was projecting about 7,000 people to grow in Huron County over the forecast period. And this has more than tripled in just 4 years, looking at 25,000 new people. And on the next slide, we have a summary of our growth forecast and the growth forecast scenarios that we put together. And again, consulted with county and area municipal staff regarding. So we do have a range of growth that we did put forward through this exercise, the low, medium, and high growth scenarios. And ultimately through the consultation and through our recommendation, we did land on this medium growth scenario in the yellow, which represents 90,200 people projected in the county by 2051. And a lot goes into these scenarios from the top down, again, getting at that macroeconomic picture, facing a recession, inflation pressures, and how does that fit in the short term? And then what's the broader outlook over the longer term? Under that high scenario, for example, it would maintain that Canada continues to exceed its immigration targets. And as such, Ontario continues to grow at a greater rate. And then that growth, again, would create more pressure within Huron County. So there is a limited amount of ability or autonomy in that regard. Of course, that immigration picture is more of a federal consideration. And as we'll get into later, a lot of Huron County's growth comes from within the province, so that pressure rather than immigration itself. And a future slide will also show the migration required to achieve this medium scenario as one of the reasons that, again, we recommended it moving forward based on the age structure of the population and what would essentially be required by the county to achieve this growth, as it's certainly not a do-nothing scenario, if you will. And on the next slide, we have a summary of the age structure forecast. And I think the one thing to point out here is the top gray line, which would be the 75 plus category within the county. As of 2021, that represents 11% of the population. And according to our modeling, by 2051, that's anticipated to represent 20%. So more than a doubling of that demographic component of the population in the county will certainly have impacts on infrastructure and other considerations such as long-term care homes, and as well housing more generally, having more apartment dwellings and things to accommodate an aging population. But as you can see, there certainly still will be this pressure towards families and younger populations, as that 0 to 19 category remains a strong component of the county. And of course, there's demographic trends that are different across the county, such as the younger ages and Howick and Morris Turnberry versus the older ages in Blue Water and Goderich. And of course, this age structure is not uniform across the county. And on the next slide, this summarizes the components of the housing forecast. So into two categories, which is the natural increase in the light blue, which is births less deaths, and then the migration in the dark blue, which is, again, largely that intra-provincial migration, which is people from one area of Ontario coming to Huron County. So as you can see, that natural increase is expected to be positive to about 2041, where it starts to peak, which would indicate that then births or deaths will be starting to occur at a greater rate than births. And as you can see, based on the fertility and mortality and age structure projections, by 46 to 51, we'd anticipate that due to the aging of the population, that will actually start to become negative. Which is, again, another reason why that medium scenario is selected, because under a higher scenario, that dark blue migration would have to be substantially more to accommodate continued growth, because that natural increase can no longer facilitate the natural progression of the growth of the county. So a greater and greater reliance on migration to grow as the county ages. On the next slide, this just summarizes the intra-provincial migration. So where from Ontario are these people, are these families and individuals migrating into Huron County? As you can see, Perth, Middlesex, and Waterloo are the largest contributors of that growth, noting here that Perth includes Stratford and St. Mary's. And on the next slide, we have our housing forecast in 5-year increments. And so this shows us here a substantial shift in housing activity. As you can see, a lot more growth projected in the short term, but we are seeing about 400 permits issued a year over the last 5 years, so supporting this short-term trend. But of course, is anticipated to be sustained over the longer-term period and then starts to dip again as that natural increase begins to decline and then more turnover within the existing housing stock. And we are anticipating, again, a shift towards more high-density dwelling types, in part to accommodate the senior population, but also to accommodate younger age groups facing affordability crisis, so having a wider range of housing options. But on the next slide, you can see that this doesn't effectively alter the housing structure of the county, as that low density, the singles and semi-detached category will still be a predominant housing form across Huron County, despite our projection that there will be more new development in high density and medium density growth. There still will be that substantial amount of low density, particularly that turns over and will be reabsorbed by new families locating into the county. And on the last slide here, we just have the seasonal housing forecast for the county, which represents about 20 units annually. In the next section, we have the housing affordability and tenure. I'm going to just try and speed up a little bit here. So if I can skip to the next slide, this summarizes the forecast by tenure and structure type. So we have our rental. We have our rental forecast and ownership forecast here. And as you can see, we're projecting about 43% of new housing growth would be in that rental category. And that is similar to the trends that have been observed over the last decade. But again, with this being a lot more housing from a total perspective, that means a lot more rental from a total perspective as well. But we do project a similar share of that growth. And on the next slide, we have a summary of the, this is a PDF form. So there would be a couple bubbles if this was on the PowerPoint, but suffice to say, we are projecting that a lot of the rental growth will be in the lowest income categories, under 40,000 for household income, whereas on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of the, or 81% of the ownership growth that we're projecting, we do think would be in those household income categories of greater than 150,000. And moving on to the last section of the presentation on the allocation. We'll go on to the next. This summarizes the housing activity or annual housing growth for each area municipality, both historical and forecast. So as you can see in those dark blue bars off to the left, that summarizes annual housing growth over the last 2 decades. And then in the light blue, we have the annual housing growth over the next 3 decades that's forecast. And I think what's apparent on the screen there is that it is a substantial positive shift for many, or not, if not all, area municipalities across the county. So this isn't expected to be isolated within a few municipalities. We think that this growth pressure will be experienced, an increase in the growth pressure will be experienced across the county. But as you can see, we do project a lot of the overall growth being allocated to those municipalities with the strong primary settlement area core. Again, in part because that can support the high density development and the urban amenities that will be required to support that aging population. So we do see a lot of pressure for that urban settlement area growth over the next 3 decades. And on the next slide, we have a similar slide. This looks at the population growth rates, again, across the county here. And so these represent, again, historically on the left, over the last decade, and then forecast from 2021 to 2051. Representing, again, a substantial increase in growth pressure from a population standpoint across the county. And so in that medium growth scenario, we're looking at a growth rate of 1.1% annually. And as you can see, we are projecting that Bluewater, Ashfield, South Huron, and Goderich will be exceeding that county average and really experiencing those strong growth rates. But that's not to say that the rest of the municipalities in the county will be experiencing any less of a growth rate than has been historically projected. And on the last slide here, we have the seasonal housing forecast. So similar to the slide you saw earlier, we do anticipate that much of the seasonal growth will be anticipated within Blue Water over the next 30 years, where we're seeing here in the dark blue an increase of 9 historically, 9 seasonal dwellings compared to a forecast of 12 seasonal units per year in the forecast period. And then for the remaining municipalities, we do anticipate there will be that continued seasonal development, but at a lesser extent than would be forecast within Blue Water. And that concludes my presentation. So I open it up to any questions. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Well, thank you very much, Adam, for this very, very impactful and informative presentation. You're a master at interpreting data so that we can understand it. Do we have any questions or comments from any members of County Council? And I'll go to the 2 past wardens, Ginn and McClellan, in that order, please.
Thank you. And one of the things that always intrigues me when I see these kinds of numbers is just the seasonal dwellings. And one of the phenomena that we're seeing in our area is that campgrounds are increasingly becoming permanent residents for a number of people, or at least, 9 months of the year, and they go south for 3 months of the year. And does your data, is it able to collect that kind of a trend? And I just wondered if you have any further comments on that scenario.
Absolutely.
Thanks for the question, Adam, please.
Through the warden. Yeah, absolutely. So the data we get on this is based on MPAC. So they provide the tax assessment. So it does depend on how those residents are self-reporting their units, whether that is their primary occupancy, or if on the other hand, it's not. But we have looked at, for example, the seasonal growth at Lakelet Lake to understand, how that's been reported. And it does seem to be a bit inconsistent through MPAC with how some parcels are reported as seasonal and others not. But it certainly is something that it's only as good as the data, I suppose, and it is based on that MPAC property code assessment.
Okay, good with that, Past Warden. And now, thank you very much, Adam. And to Past Warden McClellan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I want to try and tie a few threads together here. You made a comment about the fact that one of the biggest growth areas is going to be the rental income units, and that if I remember correctly, you stated that a lot of these will hopefully be in the neighborhood for people that are making $40,000 a year, approximately, which seems like a very interesting number when the United Way made a presentation saying that even people on social services should be making more than $40,000 a year. So then the question is, if we have that much rental housing that's able to accommodate that, and social services, according to some groups, would like to see us getting that, does the county even need to be in the social servicing housing unit? Or is this something we can get out of if, in fact, private industry is going to start building houses that meet that demand?
Thanks for the question. Adam, please.
Through the warden. Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and perhaps more of an internal staff consideration. But on that point, I would say that in part that would be accommodating the seniors population that have then retired and sold their homes. So that is a big component that we're seeing in order to facilitate retirement is, many of the aging population, they've lived in place, they've have a substantial amount of equity through the sale of their home and then choose to enter the rental market and then live off that equity. So this is part of the problem with the income data that we get from Statistics Canada is we don't like to look at it in isolation because there is this big equity consideration, particularly among older populations that would make the picture look worse, if you will, right? That these people have no incomes. How can they afford to live? Where some are relying on that equity. But on the social housing perspective, that's not something that we particularly looked at through this exercise. It would be interesting to understand further, but I can't confidently speak to whether or not the county would or should be involved in that component of the housing growth.
Thank you for that. Additional comments or question, please, Past Warden?
Yeah, just one other thing, Mr. Warden. I understand the numbers and when they started to go up in that. I didn't read an actual suggestion of what actually caused the growth in Huron County? Because I certainly have an opinion on that. Is there anything in particular that you found that caused the growth in Huron County?
Thank you. Adam, please.
Through the warden. Yeah, I would say the largest driver of that growth would be the outward pressure that we've seen from the Greater Toronto area and beyond. And that's what we've seen in a lot of municipalities surrounding Huron County, as well as that exodus from the Greater Toronto area, which has then put pressure on the areas such as Waterloo and the GGH, and then that continued pressure outwards. And that's been in part been driven by housing affordability and families and individuals looking for more ground-oriented dwellings at a more affordable rate. And of course, areas such as Huron County can offer that from a relative position compared to many other areas closer to the Toronto area. Again, quality of life, another consideration, but that I think that would be our assessment of that driving factor would be that, again, that intra-provincial growth. When we look at the components of population growth, there's very little immigration into Huron County, essentially no immigration from outside of other provinces. So really all of this growth that we've seen on that one slide there showing like Perth, Waterloo, has been that driving force of growth is that pressure from the other municipalities nearby.
If I can just add one thing to that, Mr. Warden, I agree. If there hadn't been the outward migration from the larger urban centers, there would have been no growth at all. But I'm going to say that Huron County ran with something almost 10 years ago that got the ball rolling. It started with the Economic Development Department, and it was their work going out and meeting with contractors and finding out what the problems were and why we weren't building more. That report came to County Council. Then there was also a collaboration between the Economic Development and the Planning Department. And when they changed the way they did business, and what it came down to was the Planning Department, this was Sandra's predecessor, so not Sandra, but in my opinion, they acted like the police, and it wasn't, we're going to help you get there. It was, no, you're not following the rules, so we're just going to shut it down. Where I'm going to say the Planning Department now has the attitude where when someone wants to do something, it's let's see if there's a way to make this work. And that attitude changed the opinion of a lot of contractors and brought a lot more business to Huron County. And if the contractors hadn't started building the houses, that outward migration wouldn't have helped Huron County if we hadn't been ahead of the curve of people needing to move someplace else. So I think the forward thinking of both the Economic Development and the Planning Department had a lot to do with why Huron County is growing, which I think also leads to, in the next few months, we should have a very serious discussion about what we want the county to look like in 10 years. We've got forecasts here that we can either allow to happen or we can slow them down. There's pros and cons either way. I understand that Councillor Klopp is wondering about that statement, but there may not be every area in the county that you want to grow at the same rate. There are other areas that may be better suited to increase the population. And I think those are discussions we need to have as a group. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that perspective and observation. And we helped ourselves a little bit with the broadband situation too. Councillor Klopp, please.
Thank you. Getting back to the what my colleague just brought up there, if I'm reading this right in this report, it says that 43% of the population growth here is rental units, and it's based on 40,000 income and rent at 1,000. And they're going to need rental assistance. So is that built into your growth that there has to be rental assistance for about 43% of the rental units in this?
Thank you. Adam, please.
Through the warden.
Right?
It wouldn't necessarily imply that. Getting back to the idea that, again, there would be a segment of the population, for example, that's retired and living off those retirement savings under the 40,000, so they wouldn't require specific rental assistance. But generally speaking, that would have to be examined further to say, you know, within that segment of the population, you know, what's left to, what's the deficiency essentially in terms of the private sector. So what's being delivered through the private sector, and then what's left over. And that kind of gets back to the initial point of the county's involvement within social housing and assistance and how that all fits together. But that hasn't been particularly quantified through that exercise.
Okay, but that on page 11 says 46% of the new housing income less than 100,000. So when I switch to page 71, it's got 43% of the new rental units. Again, we'll need to have incentive of some sort. Either they sold the farm and they're subsidizing the income, I guess, what you're talking about, or they sold their house in London and moved out here. But it said an interesting point that they can't afford a person under $100,000, $2,500 rent, $310,000 home. Is that $310,000 home based on what interest rate?
Through the warden, that would be based on the Bank of Canada's 5-year conventional interest rate, which I believe was modeled at 7% under this exercise. And it's also utilizing an affordability threshold of 30% of income. So it's the banks are lending beyond that. So there would be more wiggle room in that regard. But when we look at StatsCan and how it defines affordability, it does utilize the 30% threshold. So we've used that as the guiding post to determine that 310,000 for that house based on the income and the carrying costs associated with that.
And is that 310,000, is that prorated over the next, over these 21 to 50, like next 20 years?
That would be in 2020 dollars.
In 2020 dollars. Okay. So we're going to assume everybody's income is going to go up. Okay. All right. Then 150,000 can afford a 460,000 and you've got 40% new housing. 20%, I'm baffled in this one a little bit. 20% of the households would have difficulty owning or renting based on housing costs of no more than 30%. Could you explain that a little bit more detailed for me, please?
Through the warden. So could you?
You've got it on page 11. 20% of the households would have difficulty owning or renting based on housing costs of no more than 30% of income. How does that tie in with the 46 and 40 and?
I do apologize. I don't have the report in front of me. I'm
no, that's fine.
Struck on the context of it, but
I sense that Denise or Victor would like to make a comment. Is that a correct observation?
It's this section here. Section on page 11.
oh, I see. Okay. Thank you.
Adam, please.
Yes, sorry about that. Through the warden, thank you. I now see the section you're referring to. Yeah, so that part of our analysis, which I didn't really have time to get to in the presentation, represents essentially the deficiency of the forecast. So what that chapter is essentially trying to do is it's looking at those household incomes, it's comparing that against housing prices, and then of course the shelter costs, and then it's also looking at some assumptions on equity. So again, getting back to the idea of selling the farm and using that income as rent. But so when we put all of that together and we look at our housing forecast, we have our low density, our medium, and our high. We then project forward the incomes and the various age groups to determine, for example, let's look at the low, the low density category, and perhaps 25. If 75% of that category can be absorbed through income and equity, let's say, right? So we're looking at how many households are anticipated to be over $200,000 of income. We're looking at the assumptions on equity, but that leaves us a gap to say that 20% of those households, they would need to be affordable. And what we mean by that definition, so is Bill 23, released by the province, which relates to development charge exemptions, has defined affordability, and it may be redefined soon, as dwellings that are 80% of market value. So if a low density dwelling, for example, is an average $1 million, we're looking at that average cost and we're saying based on that average cost, there's still a gap of about 20% of the population that wouldn't be able to afford that low density dwelling. So it would have to be affordable. And affordability within that context can just represent that it's 80% or less of market value. So for example, the average low density dwelling might be 2,500 square feet, 4 bedrooms, on a 45 by 150 foot lot, but perhaps a single or semi-detached with 2 bedrooms, smaller lot would resale for about 800,000. So that would just represent that there would need to be a wider range of dwelling types within each category to accommodate the incomes that are forecast in the county. So it's not only this idea that there's a deficiency and it needs to be met with social housing, it's that there's this 20% deficiency that would need to be met through wider range of housing types. I hope that helps.
Yeah, yes, it did. Just StatsCan, 'cause I think we came up with this idea to hire because StatsCan always did our reports, or most of the time we dealt with them here over the years, and they were projecting 1 or 2% or whatever. So we thought that we should do one here. So what is your report? I didn't pick it out here. StatsCan still does their things. You brought up, you use some of their data, but what's StatsCan's projections for Huron County versus what you're getting as your projection?
Thank you for that. Adam, please.
Through the warden. Are you referring to StatsCan's population projections or? Oh, Ministry of Finance. Sorry. No worries. Yeah, so if you could bring up the slide, I believe it's slide 15. That'd be easier to address it. Or perhaps, yeah, the next slide actually might even work better. Yeah, so it's hard to see on the TV here, but so we have the low forecast in red, the medium in the gold color, and then right above that, there's a green line. And then at the top is our high forecast. So that green line above the medium is the Ministry of Finance. So we are coming in a bit lower than what the Ministry of Finance is projecting, not substantially. We have found through our work across Ontario, we're a little apprehensive with some of the ministry's aggression, particularly in the short term. And historically, the Ministry of Finance has been a bit more conservative, but we're finding that they're becoming more and more aggressive. So we are taking a bit more of a conservative stance, particularly, especially when this report was being worked on, or the forecasts 8 months or so ago. There was a lot more uncertainty in the economy, particularly around interest rates and the looming recession. And while things do seem to be improving, particularly in the United States, there still is that uncertainty. So we are, tempering expectations a little bit on that compared to the ministry.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call on our CAO for any perspective on this at this time, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Warden. This is really exciting work for us as a staff because it really gives us a sense of understanding the overall direction the county is headed in, and it really helps us in terms of bringing information in front of County Council, recommendations, with a bit of a dashboard in front of us. So I know as a staff and working with our partner municipalities, really appreciate the efforts that have gone into pulling this information together, and I'm sure this will be an ongoing conversation with County Council about the impacts as a result of some of the projections we're looking at here today.
Thank you very much for those comments. And thank you very much, Adam, for your presentation. Final question or comment, Councillor Klopp, please.
Yeah, that twigged on, we're going to have more discussion and conversation. And so just, if I'm reading this right, 46% have new housing, 100,000 or less income, and 20% are going to have problems. Would you say that the growth forecast, is this too simplistic? The growth forecast is 40 or 66% of the forecast finance and your own work is really based on either they win the lottery or have a lot of income to have their house, or they get or the federal government, which is us, subsidize their housing in order for the growth to happen. Is that a fair comment to make?
Okay, thank you. Adam, please.
Through the warden. Yeah, it's an interesting comment for sure. And it's somewhat unknown how that will materialize, right? Well, one of the things that is most difficult about this exercise is the equity assumption. And that's the thing we really struggle with StatsCan work, is they just look at income and they just look at housing costs, and it doesn't tell you anything. It really doesn't, particularly in a place like Huron County where you're experiencing that intra-provincial migration. People are coming from Toronto, they're coming from Waterloo, and they've just sold their $1.3 million home. And so things aren't so bad migrating to Huron County, and perhaps they don't have the high incomes, but that equity made the purchase here a lot more affordable. So that's the hardest thing to quantify as part of this exercise, but it's certainly the most important, I would say.
Appreciate your comment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. Councillor Finch, please.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent presentation. I loved everything about it. And I totally concur with Councillor McClellan's comments too. Should we as a county, though, be encouraging more mid-rise condos? When we talk about the housing, that idea would meet the intensification objectives, but it would allow seniors to transition from their current $800,000 house into a condo. If they buy the condo for, let's say, $400,000, they have $400,000 equity. It allows new families to move into those homes. Is there an argument there? I think there is. Young people that are trying to start out, you know, I've got family members that are young trying to find a place. They can't afford the 800,000 because they have to cut the grass, do the snow. They can buy a condo, then they're in. If it's a 2-bedroom condo, one person lives in there. They take in a boarder to help offset the cost. There's rules within the condo system, so it creates a community within a community. But it does allow opportunities that we're maybe missing. I think our staff are doing an amazing job. And with Sandra, of course, the comment that Bernie mentioned about, you know, creative. I think that's the way we should be looking at our developers. I did have a developer actually say to me, he built a rental apartment system and he wished he'd built it as a condo. So it just tells me that maybe we're not right on the right track. We're on the right track, but maybe we should stay and start looking at maybe condominiums. What's your opinion?
Thanks for the question. Adam, please.
Yeah, through the warden. I think regardless of the tenure, when it comes to first and foremost, having that structure type is most important. As you said, having that opportunity for seniors and young families is really vital. So whether or not it's rent or ownership, it's still relatively affordable, and it allows younger families to get into the market, and it allows older individuals to retire with less maintenance, again, to even if it's a condo, they're still going to have significant savings, or hopefully, as long as there's enough of the structure type. One of the things I hear anecdotally in my hometown is that it's not affordable to move from the single detached to a condo simply because they're just not there, and the prices are so inflated because of that, right? So I think it is vital, first and foremost, that structure type exists, and then certainly there's consideration on what tenure is required. Oftentimes, the pro forma of a development would tell the developer, you're best off doing a condo development because they can take their money and reinvest it, and it's not a 25-year investment to recoup on that. So it all depends on the developer and the market demand, but I would say both are an important segment of the housing component. And as such, we forecast that demand for high density through this work.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I think the last word will go to our CAO, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Warden, I just wanted to let County Council know that Sandra and the department are working on putting together presentations that subsequently will be coming to all of the partner municipalities as well. So this information will be shared throughout Huron County.
Thank you for that. And thank you very much, Adam. This is a tremendous, informative, impactful presentation at the macro level, the macro vantage point of where we're projected to go in Huron County. And it's our responsibility, along with our staff, to manage the growth intelligently. And we're in a great position in Huron County. Thank you very much, Adam, for presenting to us this morning and responding to the various questions.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the opportunity. It was a real pleasure to work on this study. So thank you again.
Great work. Thank you. Would I have a mover and a seconder to receive this report for information purposes, please? Councillors Bazinet and Anderson, all in favor of the motion? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any comments? And thank you also very much to Denise and Victor for being with us this morning. Under item number 6, do any councillors have any comments that they would like to share at this time? I'm going to go to Councillors Bazinet. Past Warden McClellan, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden. I just wanted to make mention, there is an agricultural show going on right now at Goderich Memorial Arena. It starts today at 10 a.m. and runs till 4:30 p.m. and again tomorrow as well. So I'm sure there might be some county councillors that maybe want to stop by Memorial Arena after our county council meeting today to check it out. So I just wanted to make mention of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that reminder, and we do hope it's a great show. Past Warden McClellan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. 2 things I want to bring up. The first one, and maybe I'm just confused about it, but it was raised by another member of County Council at one time, that our hybrid meetings were, if you were sick or if it was inclement weather or whatever, but it was specifically talked about that we weren't going to do it if we were away on holidays. Now, I don't have any problem with the staff. That's between the staff and the CAO. They can figure that out. But the discussion was specifically about council members. I don't know if any final decision was made, but it certainly was brought up that we did not think that that was appropriate. And I'm kind of surprised that we're doing it. Does anybody else remember that we had this conversation?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I will defer to our staff, please.
I think I'll take this. I absolutely don't recall that discussion. I know there was discussion regarding county access to emails outside of the country, which isn't permitted due to security levels. And there's different ways that we can go around that. Logging onto a county council meeting through Zoom is completely safe. It's internet based. And that's one of the perks of having a hybrid system. So I don't recall the discussion at all. If anything, I think this allows for access wherever you are.
Okay, and I'm fine with it however we go with it. I do remember the discussion. I remember who raised it, but that's okay. My other thing was this. I'm really happy that we're past the budget stage, but there's still one big topic that I need to get off my plate personally, and that is last fall when we had our meetings, we talked about we were going to do a review of the homes. I don't care what the final decision is of county council, whether we do something, don't do something, stick with the status quo. Either way, it's fine. But I'd really like us to have the discussion, and I'm curious about when we can do that. And Mr. Ward, my concern is that sometimes we'll say, we're going to get to it May or June, and that usually becomes fall because July and August, we're not here. We're on holidays, staff are on holidays. If we're going to have a discussion, I'm wondering how soon we can have a discussion. I'm not even asking for a whole lot of reports or anything up front. When could county council even just have a discussion of, is there any merit in looking at something? Can we move that topic forward at all?
Okay, thank you for the question. I will defer to our CAO on capacity, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Warden. So it's important for county council to have meaningful discussion in relation to the 2024 budget. And that has been the focus of staff over the last weeks and months. And that was direction that I had given staff in terms of making sure that the information was coming in front of county council so that we could have fulsome discussion and achieve the targets that county council was looking for us to achieve. In the meantime, some preliminary work has happened in relation to the discussion that we started back in the fall from the service delivery review. I anticipate that in April, there will be a report coming back to county council on the particular topic. I understand that for you as a county councillor, you feel like you don't need a ton of information in order to have the discussion. From my perspective as CAO, I need to make sure that county council fully understands the landscapes and the breadth of any decisions that could be made on the topic. So once I'm confident that that information is contained in that report, again, I'm anticipating April, the information will come in front of county council for discussion.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Klopp, please.
Thank you. Yes, it ties in. I thought we made a motion, but a while back about getting a report on homes. So I guess that's what that referred to. With regards to your previous question, I believe I was one who brought up the issue of when we were discussing what were going to be our parameters around Zoom, and why, of course, the clerk will not remember it as much because no motions were made. It was general statements of good faith, and I made it very clear where I stand on it. And I also made it very clear that at the end of the day, though, unless a majority of council wishes to make it law, then that's when it will happen. Otherwise, it was just a statement on my little bit of how I look at things. and I appreciate that you brought it up today, but it definitely was mentioned, but no motions were made. And I'm not judging anybody on this at all, just my view of it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from any members of County Council? Personally, it was great to see Councillor Bazinet last week joining our meeting and being able to do that along with Councillor Noel today. I think that's great when we have situations that occur in our personal lives that we are still able to join our meetings. I really do think that is advantageous. So with that, I would like to move on to the consent agenda, and that is items 7.1 through 7.5. Is there anything that anyone would like to pull on this? And if not, I would entertain a mover and a seconder to receive items 7.1 through 7.4 be approved with actions as noted. Councillor Jay Heffer and Dietrich, all in favor of the motion? And that is carried. I thank you. Under Social and Property Services, Cheryl Patience is joining us this morning to respond to any questions regarding the placement agreement for students. Welcome, Cheryl. Do any members of County Council have any questions of Cheryl on this report? And seeing none, Cheryl will be with us for the next couple presentations. So I will entertain a mover and a seconder to receive the report for information with the County of Huron Social and Property Services Department. Jay Becker and Alvin McClellan, all in favor of the motion. And that again is carried. Thank you very much. On to 8.2 is the recommendation award tender for childcare and early years plan. Again, Cheryl is here to respond to any questions the council may have on this report. And if I see none, I will entertain a mover and a seconder that we receive this report for information and approve entering in an agreement and the execution thereof. P. Heffer and Councillor Finch, all in favor of the motion. And again, that is carried. I thank you. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for joining us to respond to any questions. Great reports. Homes for the Aged, 9.1 is the Heartland and Highland Apartment Age in Place Increase. Connie Townsend is available to respond to any questions that council may have. Do we have any questions on this report? Councillor Vanstone, please.
Report. I'm just wondering why we didn't approve 7.5. It says item 7.1 to 7.4, and we did approve that, but we didn't approve 7.5. I'm just wondering why.
Yep. Thank you very much for that. Clerk, do you have a comment before I apologize?
Sorry about that. I believe that's an error in the agenda. The warden did indicate the consent agenda, but he did say 7.1.74, which is entirely our fault. It does say 7.4 in the agenda. It should say 7.5. I consider that to be a minor error, and I just assume that 7.5 is approved, unless you'd like to approve it separately. Entirely up to council.
No, I'm just wondering why we didn't do it, so that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you for drawing attention to that. And at the outset, I did indicate 7.1.75, and I indicated otherwise at the end of that. So thank you very much for that. Okay, on 9.1, do we have any questions of Connie on this report, please? Councillor Klopp, please.
Thank you. And through you to Connie, just want to clarify, we had the discussion about the apartments moving them up from like 800 to 1,200. This is a different part of the homes?
Connie?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Warden. Yes, this is just the other component of the rent piece, which is the meals, the housekeeping, and an administration fee. So it's the two amounts combined for the total rent.
Thank you for that clarification, Connie, and that suits Councillor Klopp. Any further questions or comments on this? And if not, I will entertain a mover and a seconder to receive the report for information and approve the monthly increases as presented. Councillor Vanstone and Councillor Finch, all in favor of the motion. And that is carried. Thanks very much, Connie. And you're also here for 9.2, the one-time funding for the purchase of diagnostic equipment. Do we have any questions or comments for Connie on this report? And seeing none, I will entertain a mover and a seconder to receive this report for information purposes and to enter into a contract and the execution thereof. Councillor Becker and past Warden again. All in favor of the motion? And that is carried. I thank you for that, and thanks very much, Connie. Under Emergency Services, it is a pleasure to welcome Jeff Horseman to address Council on the EMS Cross-Border Billing Agreement. Welcome, Jeff, please.
Good morning. Through you, Mr. Warden, I was just going to take a couple minutes and go over high-level report so we understand the cross-border billing with our neighbors to the north. So Huron County Paramedic Services has provided seamless service with all of our neighbors since its inception in 2001 at the downloading. This is required by legislation that we have a seamless service that's across the province for paramedic services. However, the Ambulance Act allows us to negotiate or enter into agreement for some cost recovery with our neighbors in certain situations. Previously, we've held contracts or agreements with most of our neighbors. Over time, some of those contracts have expired and we have chosen as a council not to renew them. They've been not necessarily in the best interest or need to renew them. Some of the services that we have would have been paying in the past have no interest in recuperating that money, and therefore those agreements became, no use to us. Other services, the amount that we bill them and the amount that they bill us basically levels out. And again, there's really no need for an agreement. The one service that we do provide a significant amount of service to is our neighbors to the north of Bruce County. Our contract with them expired on December 31st of 2021. We went through some negotiations, Chief Schaus and myself, to make sure that we could get a new agreement. That was based on direction given by the Financial Committee here. Just so that you're aware, when we do have a cross-border agreement with a neighbor, if we are paying the neighbor, then that becomes part of our 50-50 funding calculation. And therefore, the amount that we pay is actually funded 50%. If we are a receiver from a neighbor, then that comes off of our 50-50 funding. So the amount of money that we receive from that neighbor is deducted from our 50-50 funding calculation with the province. Okay. Bruce County provides us with payment year over year. They have always provided us with payment, and that basically is because that we have a station that sits on the border of Bruce County or very close to the border of Bruce County, and their stations are a little bit further north, and therefore we're the closest vehicle for that south border. Similarly, Grand Bend is the closest for us at our south border. So this contract, again, we have recommended that it be only for a term of 5 years. Both Bruce County and ourselves are going through a deployment review, and we are both implementing changes as recommended by that consulting firm. That happens to be the same consulting firm that both of us employed. It's a fairly common consulting firm across the province right now in this work. And as such, part of their deployment review was to implement a 12-hour day vehicle in the southwest corner of Bruce County in the Holyrood area right now, and they're trialing that. That has meant that it's picked up some of the call volume that we would typically do for them during the day, and has lowered the amount of cross-border billing or cross-border costs that they've paid for us. As it's still a trial, and they have not committed to putting a vehicle there permanently or to building a station or any of those scenarios yet. Their chief has recommended a 5-year renewal of this to see what's going to happen long-term for them. So right now, what we're recommending is that you allow, what staff is recommending is that you approve that the warden agree to this 5-year term renewal. The agreement is exactly the same as it was for the previous 10-year term. So there's no changes to the agreement other than the length of the term. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Jeff. And now I will open it up to any members of the County Council, and I'll go first to past Warden McClellan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I certainly agree with the 5-year term based on the studies that you're doing now. That just makes common sense. With the study you're doing now, there's also talk about having an ambulance station reconstructed in the Seaforth area, which would put us a lot closer to the Perth border. Is that being taken into consideration about how that cross-border billing will be affected if we actually go ahead with that construction?
Thanks for the question. Jeff, please.
Through the warden, that would have to be taken into account again. In the meantime, since we had moved our base to Tucker Smith in the early 2000s, they've actually constructed a base in Mitchell, which is offset, and that's why the cross border is pretty neutral between us and Perth County right now. So it would have to be taken back into consideration. We'd have to have those discussions with Perth County again at that time or as we're planning it. We don't see that we'd pick up a significant amount more than what Perth County is doing for us right now. But it would definitely be something that we could ask the consultants to play in to those to the deployment for that area. And then we could have some discussions with our chief.
Thank you for that question and the response. Any additional questions or comments on Jeff's report to us this morning? And if not, I will entertain a mover and a seconder to receive the report for information purposes and execute the agreement for the cross-border billing agreement. Councillor Noel, would you be so inclined to move that? As you are. And a seconder is Jay Heffer. All in favor of the motion? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Jeff. Under Public Works, 11.1 is the recommendation to award the tender for the Wingham Patrol Yard. Imran is here to respond to any questions that any members of council may have this. Absolutely a very favorable tender on this. Questions, comments? If not, I would entertain a mover and a seconder to receive the report with the anticipated scope and to execute this agreement. And that would be P. Heffer and Councillor Harding. All in favor of the motion? And that is carried. And again, thanks very much, Imran. Great work. Under Economic Development, I would like to welcome Mark Nonkus to respond to any questions on the Ukrainian Pathways report. Does Council have any questions of Mark on this? And if not, I will entertain a mover and a seconder to receive this report for information purposes, please. Past Warden Ginn and Councillor McClellan. All in favor of the motion? And that again is carried. Thanks very much, Mark. 12.2 is the amendment agreement for the red contract. Vicky Loss, I would like to invite you to address council on this at this time, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Warden, through you to council. I just wanted to make one point of clarification. Last week, you would have heard that we were able to extend the contract until the end of December. What is before you is a contract amendment that extends to the end of March 2025, the fiscal year for the province. We did this so that we have a cushion. The province was gracious enough to give us an extension, but they're not fond of doing that. So I didn't want to go back a second time in case something else arose to slow the project. So the extension is till March 2025, but we do anticipate if all things stay the same, we will be completed at December 2024 as stated in budget talks.
Thank you very much for that, Vicky. And I'll now open it up to any members of County Council that may have any questions or comments. And I'll go first to Councillor Klopp, please.
Thank you. I'll move the motion, and thank you, Vicky, for your hard work on this and trying to make it work. It made sense to me. Thank you.
Oh, great words. Thanks very much. Motion has been made. Do we have a seconder for this? And is Councillor Finch to approve the report with the bylaw and authorize the execution of such. All in favor of the motion? And that is carried. Thank you very much, Vicky. Under Administration Policies and Other Issues, 13.1 is the Gibbons Build Advocacy Update. Our CAO is here to respond to any questions that Council may have of this. And if I see none, I will entertain a mover and a seconder to receive the Gibbons Advocacy Update for information purposes. Past Warden Ginn and Councillor Bazinet. All in favor of the motion? And that is carried. Thank you, CAO. Correspondence, is there anything under correspondence that anyone would like to address? And if not, I would entertain a mover and a seconder to accept the correspondence not specifically dealt with for information. Councillor Noel and P. Heifer. All in favor of the motion? And that is carried. Thank you. If there is any new or unfinished business, I would suggest that any members of council contact our CAO in advance so that it can be placed on a future agenda. Do we have any notice of motion at this time that anyone would like to bring forward to a future meeting? And if not, I would entertain a mover and a seconder to have the 4 bylaws introduced, be given first, second, and final readings, and passed by the warden and the clerk. And that is Councillor Finch and passed Warden McClellan. All in favor of this motion? And that is carried. Thank you. We do not have a closed session today, correct, CO work? Perfect. I would like to draw attention to the upcoming meetings. Council Day 1 will be the 6th day of March in these council chambers, and of course it's a hybrid meeting, and we really do appreciate our staff that join us virtually and any members of council to join us virtually for our hybrid meetings. Economic Development is on Thursday the 7th at 9 a.m. at Napier Street. Huron County Accessibility, we had a great session last week on this. It will be held on the 18th of March at 9 a.m. It's a virtual meeting. Council Day 2 will be the 20th of March, a hybrid meeting in the Library Board on the 21st of March. Would I have a mover and a seconder for the confirmatory bylaw to confirm the proceedings in accordance with our procedural bylaw? Councillor Van Stone and P. Heifer. All in favor of the motion? And that, again, is carried. I thank you very much. Thanks very much to all members of council and to our staff for the great discussion today. Again, congratulations to Brittany. We're very proud of the work that you do, and always know that Huron County is very proud of you. And I will entertain a mover and a seconder to adjourn at this time. Councillors Dietrich and Heifer. All in favor of the motion? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Please enjoy the rest of this beautiful spring day.